The envelope felt heavy in my hands despite containing just a single sheet of paper. My father's stern expression told me everything I needed to know before I even opened it. This wasn't going to be a Merry Christmas Eve. I'm Elena, and this was the moment my family decided I wasn't worth keeping around. Well, aren't you going to open it? My sister Rachel's sugary, sweet voice cut through the tension in our family's living room. She sat perched on the arm of Mom's favorite leather chair, already wearing the diamond bracelet they'd given her moments earlier. The crackling fireplace and twinkling Christmas tree felt like a mockery now. I carefully broke the seal, aware of 4 pairs of eyes boring into me. The lawyer, Mr. Harrison, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Not exactly your typical holiday guest. I don't understand, I said, my voice surprisingly steady as I read the document. You're cutting me out of the will completely? Mom, Diana to her society friends, didn't even look up from her wine glass. It's for the best, dear. You've made your choice, and we've made ours. My choices? I laughed, but it came out hollow. You mean starting my own business instead of joining the family company? A bakery, Dad's voice dripped with disdain. We spent a fortune on your education, and you want to spend your life making cupcakes? They're not just cupcakes, Dad. It's my dream. Dreams don't pay bills. He cut me off. Rachel understands responsibility. She's already showing real promise at the firm. My sister's smirk grew wider. Don't be dramatic, Elena. You knew this was coming. Coming. I folded the paper carefully, my hands trembling slightly. The Christmas tree lights reflected off the glossy paper, creating dancing patterns that reminded me of the sparklers we used to wave around as kids, back when family meant something different. Actually, I stood up, smoothing my dress. I expected better from my parents. Silly me. Now, Elena, Mr. Harrison intervened. Perhaps we could discuss this after the holidays? There's nothing to discuss. Mom's voice was ice. The decision is final. I walked to the coat rack, pulling on my winter jacket. The wool felt scratchy against my neck. Or maybe that was just the lump forming in my throat. Where are you going? Dad demanded. We haven't even had dinner yet. I've lost my appetite. I reached for my purse, pausing at the doorway. You know what's funny? You all think you're punishing me, but really, I smiled, thinking about the secret I'd been keeping. You might be punishing yourselves more than you realize. What's that supposed to mean? Rachel stood up, her perfectly manicured brows furrowing. Merry Christmas, the first said, ignoring her question. And good luck. Something tells me you're going to need it. The heavy oak door closed behind me with a satisfying thud. Outside, snow was falling softly, muffling the sound of Christmas carols drifting from neighboring houses. I pulled out my phone and dialed a familiar number. Sophie? Yeah, it's done. They did exactly what we expected. I walked to my car, boots crunching in the fresh snow. No, I'm okay. Actually, I'm better than okay. Remember that thing we talked about? I think it's time. As I drove away from my childhood home, I couldn't help but smile. They thought they were writing me out of their story, but they had no idea I was about to become the author of their downfall. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. Hope you're happy with yourself. You've ruined Christmas. I typed back quickly. On the contrary, sis. This is the best Christmas gift I could have gotten, Freedom. Turning onto the main road, I headed toward downtown where my real future waited. The family might have their precious will, but I had something better, a plan. And thanks to their own oversight, I had the means to execute it perfectly. The vacation house they'd carelessly left, in my name years ago, would fund my dreams and their nightmare. They just didn't know it yet. Some legacies aren't inherited, I whispered to myself, watching the family mansion shrink in my rearview mirror. They're built from scratch, just like the perfect cake. The snow kept falling, covering my tire tracks, erasing any trace of my presence from their perfectly manicured driveway. By this time next year, everything would be different, and I couldn't wait to serve them their just desserts. 3 months earlier, I stood in front of the lakeside vacation house, key in hand, while Sophie whistled low beside me. And they seriously forgot this was in your name? She ran her hand along the pristine siding. A whole-ass vacation house? Dad put it in my name 5 years ago for tax purposes. I unlocked the door, breathing in the musty air. They haven't used it in 3 years. Probably don't even remember it exists. The interior was exactly as I remembered, all pine furniture and nautical decorations, frozen in time like a perfectly preserved museum of family memories I no longer wanted. How much do you think it's worth? Sophie asked, peeking through the lakefront windows. I pulled out my phone, showing her the realtor's estimate. Her eyes widened. Holy crap, Elena. That's enough to open your bakery, and then some. I smiled, running my fingers along the dusty kitchen counter. The down payment, equipment, first year's rent, everything. Your parents are going to lose their minds when they find out. That's the best part, they won't find out until it's too late. I opened the fridge, grimacing at the ancient condiments inside. The property transfer was legal. They signed it over to me fair and square. Sophie flopped onto the couch, sending up a cloud of dust. Okay, walk me through this master plan of yours again. Simple. I sell the house, use the money to open Sweet Dreams Bakery. Still think that name's a bit much. Shut up. It's perfect. I threw a dusty throw pillow at her. Anyway, I open the bakery, establish myself, and wait. Wait for what? For karma to do its thing. I sat beside her. See, what my family doesn't know is that their precious company is in trouble. Big trouble. How do you know that? Remember my friend Marcus? He works in commercial banking. Let's just say their last loan application wasn't exactly approved. The next few weeks were a blur of real estate agents, paperwork, and secret meetings. The house sold faster than expected. Turns out lakefront property is quite desirable, even in need of updating. You're really doing this, Marcus said over coffee one morning, reviewing my business plan. I've got to admit, when you first mentioned it, I thought you were just venting. People always underestimate me, I replied, sliding him a sample of my latest recipe. Try this. He took a bite of the lavender honey cake and closed his eyes. Okay, scratch that. You're definitely doing this. This is incredible. That's not even my best recipe. I pulled out my laptop, showing him the location I'd found. What do you think? Downtown, high-foot traffic, reasonable rent. He nodded approvingly. You've done your homework. But are you sure you want to burn this bridge with your family? They burned it first. I closed the laptop firmly. Besides, this isn't about revenge. It's about finally doing something for myself. But even as I said it, I couldn't ignore the satisfaction I felt, knowing what was coming. The day I signed the lease, Sophie brought champagne to the empty storefront. We sat on the floor, drinking from paper cups. To sweet dreams, she toasted. May your revenge be as sweet as your pastries. It's not revenge, I protested weakly. Honey, you're literally using their forgotten vacation house to fund your independence while they're about to face financial ruin. That's some premium revenge right there. I couldn't argue with that. The contractors started work the next day, transforming the space into my vision. Every decision felt like a step further from my family's shadow. The warm copper light fixtures, the exposed brick walls, the custom display cases. The morning we installed the sign, I stood across the street, watching the gold letters catch the sunlight. Sweet Dreams Bakery and Cafe, my dream, my name, my rules. My phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. Mom and Dad are worried about you. They say you're not returning their calls. I typed back. Been busy. Big things happening. Whatever. Just don't come crying to us when your little hobby fails. I smiled, pocketing my phone as the first delivery of professional equipment arrived. Let them think I was playing at business. Let them dismiss me one last time. Where do you want the ovens? The delivery man called out. Against that wall, I pointed, where everyone walking by can see them through the windows. Because that was part of the plan too. Letting success speak for itself. In 3 months, this place would be impossible to ignore, especially from the windows of my family's law firm just 2 blocks away. The sweet smell of karma was already in the air, and soon it would be baking. We've got another line out the door. Sarah, my newest hire, called from the front. And 3 more wedding cake consultations just booked online. I wiped the flour from my hands and peeked through the kitchen door. The morning sun streamed through our front windows, illuminating a queue of eager customers that stretched past the neighboring shops. 3 months in, and Sweet Dreams had become the talk of downtown. Your red velvet cake just got featured on Food and Wine's Instagram, Marcus announced, walking in through the back door. He'd taken to stopping by most mornings, usually with local business news and a hungry look in his eyes. Here, I handed him a fresh cranberry orange scone, payment for being my unofficial business advisor. Speaking of business, he lowered his voice, glancing around. Word on the street is your family's firm isn't doing so hot. They've had to let go of 3 junior partners already. I concentrated on piping delicate roses onto a wedding cake sample. Is that so? You know, most people would feel bad about their families struggling. Most people's families wouldn't disown them over following their dreams. I set down the piping bag. Besides, I warned them. Sort of. The bell above the door chimed, and I heard Sophie's familiar laugh. "Oh my God, you have to see this," she called out, waving her phone. The local paper just published their best of downtown list. Guess who's #1 in the food category? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. Rachel's name flashed on the screen. Well, I muttered, answering. To what do I owe the pleasure? Is it true? She didn't bother with hello. You're the one who bought that building on 3rd Street? I smiled, remembering the offer I'd made last week. The success of Sweet Dreams had left me with enough capital to start investing in real estate. Actually, I'm in the process of buying 3 buildings on 3rd Street. Why? She paused. That's where Dad was planning to expand the firm. Oh, really? I sprinkled edible gold dust on a batch of macarons. Guess you'll have to find somewhere else. Property values are crazy downtown these days. You're doing this on purpose, aren't you? Doing what? Running a successful business? Making smart investments? Isn't that what you all wanted me to do? The line went quiet for a moment. Mom wants to know if you'll come to dinner next week. Sorry, can't. I'm catering the mayor's daughter's wedding. I paused. But hey, feel free to stop by the bakery sometime. We make an amazing humble pie. After hanging up, I turned to find Marcus and Sophie staring at me. That was cold, Marcus said, but he was grinning. That was perfect, Sophie corrected. But you never told me about the buildings on 3rd Street, because I just finalized the paperwork this morning. I pulled out a folder from under the counter. 3 historic buildings, prime location. And guess who's going to be my first tenant? Who? That artisanal coffee roaster you love. They're opening their flagship store. I showed them the lease agreement. Between their rent and Sweet Dreams' profits, I'll be able to buy 2 more properties by year's end. While your family's firm downsizes, Marcus mused. That's some masterful chess you're playing. A motion from the front interrupted us. Through the kitchen window, I spotted my mother's perfectly coiffed hair in the crowd. Speaking of chess, I muttered. Showtime. The first stepped into the front, watching as she took in the bustling cafe, the elegant decor, the happy customers. Her expression shifted from disdain to surprise to something that looked almost like regret. Elena, she said stiffly, this is unexpected. Hi, Mom. What can I get you? Our signature dream cake is featured in Food and Wine this month. She flinched at my casual tone. Your father and I need to discuss something with you. Something important. I'm pretty busy here, I gestured to the full cafe. You know how it is, running a successful business and all. Please, she said, and for the first time in years, I heard a crack in her perfect facade. It's about the firm. We need your help. I let the words hang in the air, savoring them like the perfect bite of dessert. Behind her, Sophie was practically vibrating with anticipation. Well, I said finally, I do have a cancellation from my last appointment today. I could meet you at 5. I paused, then added with a sweet smile. At my office, of course. Mom's eyes darted around the bakery, my bakery, and she nodded stiffly. As she left, Sophie sidled up to me. You going to make them grovel, right? I watched my mother's retreating form through the window, remembering Christmas Eve, remembering years of dismissal and disappointment. No, I said, turning back to my customers. I'm going to make them eat cake. At exactly 5:00, my parents walked into Sweet Dreams. The evening sun cast long shadows through the windows, and I'd closed early, sending my staff home. Only Sophie remained, pretending to clean tables while eavesdropping shamelessly. Would you like some tea? I offered, gesturing to the vintage tea set I'd arranged. It's Earl Grey, your favorite, Mom. This isn't a social call, Dad snapped, but Mom put a hand on his arm. Tea would be lovely, she said, settling into one of the copper-backed chairs. Her eyes kept darting around the bakery, taking in the fresh flowers, the gleaming display cases, the wall of press clippings. I poured 3 cups, adding a plate of lavender shortbread. So it brings you to my little hobby. Dad's jaw tightened. We need to discuss a business proposition. Business? I raised an eyebrow. I thought making cupcakes wasn't a real business. Things have changed, Mom said carefully. The firm is facing some temporary difficulties. Temporary? I took a sip of tea. That's not what I heard. I heard you've laid off staff, lost major clients, and your credit rating is in the toilet. How did you? Dad started. Then his eyes narrowed. Marcus. That little snake. Marcus is a friend. Unlike family, friends actually look out for each other. Mom set down her cup with a clatter. We're here because we need a partner. Someone with liquid assets and business acumen. I couldn't help but laugh. Business acumen? 3 months ago, you said I was throwing my life away. We were wrong, Mom said quietly. And for a moment, I almost believed her. What you've built here, it's impressive. Very impressive, Dad added, though it clearly pained him. The mayor's daughter's wedding, the press, the property investments. Speaking of, I interrupted. This is about 3rd Street, isn't it? Among other things. He pulled out a folder. We're prepared to offer you a partnership in the firm. Full voting rights, equal share with Rachel. I took the folder, but didn't open it. And what makes you think I'd want that? Because it's your legacy, Mom insisted. Your birthright. My legacy? I stood up, walking to the wall of press clippings. This is my legacy. Those buildings on 3rd Street, my legacy. This bakery that you said would fail, that's my legacy. The firm is struggling, Dad admitted, his voice rough. Without an injection of capital, you'll lose everything? I finished. Funny how karma works, isn't it? From her spot by the tables, Sophie didn't even pretend not to be listening anymore. What do you want? Mom asked, desperation creeping into her voice. Name your price. I turned back to them, leaning against the counter. You really don't get it, do you? This isn't about money. This is about respect, recognition, everything you never gave me. We're giving it now. Dad's fist hit the table, rattling the teacups. No, you're not. You're here because you're desperate. Because your perfect daughter Rachel can't save you. And your backup plan just bought the buildings you needed. Mom's face paled. The vacation house. That's how you funded all this. The vacation house you forgot was in my name? Yes. Turns out I'm pretty good at managing assets when people underestimate me. You planned this, Dad accused. All of it. No, you planned this. Every time you dismissed my dreams. Every time you favored Rachel. Every time you tried to force me into your mold. I opened the folder, scanned the partnership offer, then slowly tore it in half. I just adapted. You're enjoying this, Mom whispered, watching us suffer. Actually, I'm not. I'm just finally standing up for myself. I gathered the torn papers. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a wedding cake to finish. They stood, Dad's face red with anger, Mom's with shame. At the door, she turned back. What about family? She asked. Doesn't that mean anything to you? It meant everything to me until Christmas Eve, when you showed me exactly how little it meant to you. After they left, Sophie let out a long whistle. That was intense. It's not over, I said, starting to clear the tea service. They'll be back. And nothing. The firm can sink or swim on its own. I'm done playing their games. My phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. How dare you turn them down? They were trying to make peace. I typed back, no, they were trying to save themselves. Big difference. By the way, how's that corner office working out? Sophie read the exchange over my shoulder. You know what this calls for? What? She grinned, pulling out 2 forks. Revenge cake. We spent the next hour eating leftover wedding cake samples and planning my next property acquisition. Sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about succeeding so spectacularly they have to watch from the sidelines. They're filing for bankruptcy, Marcus announced, bursting into my office early Monday morning. Your family's firm. It's happening. I looked up from the stack of invoices I'd been reviewing. Already? I thought they'd last at least another month. 3 major clients pulled out last week. Word got around about their financial troubles, and he made a diving motion with his hand. It's like watching dominoes fall. My phone lit up with a call from Rachel. I put it on speaker. This is your fault, she shrieked before I could say hello. You did this to us. Actually, Rachel, you did this to yourselves. I just refused to save you. Mom's a mess. Dad hasn't left his study in 2 days. Is this what you wanted? I signed the last invoice, pushing it aside. What I wanted was a family that supported me. What I got was disowned on Christmas Eve. Funny how life works out. We're having a family dinner tonight, she said, her voice suddenly controlled. You need to come. Need to? I don't need to do anything. Please, she whispered, and for the first time since we were kids, I heard genuine emotion in her voice. Everything's falling apart. I glanced at Marcus, who shrugged. Fine. What time? 7. And Elena, leave your attitude at that bakery of yours. I hung up, turning to Marcus. Want to be my backup? He shook his head. This is family business, but text me if you need an escape plan. At 7 sharp, I pulled up to my childhood home. The mansion looked different somehow. Smaller, less intimidating. Like seeing a childhood monster in daylight and realizing it's just a shadow. Rachel opened the door before I could knock. They're in the dining room. Try not to make things worse. Lovely to see you too, sis. The dining room was a museum of uncomfortable memories. Formal dinners, lectures about responsibility, countless disappointments. Mom and Dad sat at opposite ends of the massive table, a feast laid out between them. You came, Mom said softly. I'm curious by nature. I took my old seat. So what's this about? Dad cleared his throat. We've made mistakes, serious mistakes. The firm, Mom started. I know about the bankruptcy, I interrupted. Marcus told me this morning. Of course he did, Rachel muttered. We've lost everything, Dad continued. The house will have to be sold. The cars, the vacation homes. Home, I corrected. Singular. I already sold the lake house, remember? Mom flinched. We deserve that. But Elena, we're still family. Are we? Because the last time we had dinner together, you handed me disinheritance papers as a Christmas gift. We were wrong, Dad said, and the admission hung heavy in the air. About everything. The firm, your bakery, you. Sweet Dreams is worth more than the firm now, Rachel added bitterly. Happy? I pushed my untouched plate away. What do you want from me? A chance, Mom said. To make things right. To be a family again. And the fact that I'm successful now has nothing to do with it. We're not asking for money, Dad insisted. No? I raised an eyebrow. Then what are you asking for? Forgiveness, Mom whispered. A fresh start. I stood up, walking to the window. Outside, the garden where I'd once dreamed of having my wedding was overgrown. Another casualty of their financial collapse. You know what's ironic? I turned back to them. If you'd supported my dream from the beginning, I probably would have helped you now. But you made me prove myself by fighting you every step of the way. We know, Dad said. And we're sorry. Sorry doesn't fix years of dismissal. Sorry doesn't erase Christmas Eve. Sorry doesn't. Then tell us what will. Rachel burst out. Tell us how to fix this. I looked at each of them, Mom's perfectly maintained facade cracking, Dad's proud shoulders slumped, Rachel's mascara-stained cheeks. Time, I said finally. Time and proof that you've actually changed. Not because you need something from me, but because you actually understand what you did wrong. And until then, Mom asked. I reached into my bag, pulling out a small box. Until then, you can have this. It's a new recipe I've been working on. I call it Humble Beginnings. Dark chocolate with a hint of bitterness, covered in gold leaf. Is this a joke? Rachel asked. No, I replied, heading for the door. It's a reminder. Sometimes you have to lose everything to appreciate what you had. Elena, Dad called after me. Will we see you again? I paused in the doorway. The bakery is open Tuesday through Sunday, 9 to 6. You know where to find me. Walking out, I felt lighter somehow. Not because I'd forgiven them. That would take time, but because finally, after all these years, they were the ones watching me walk away. The morning after the family dinner, I arrived at Sweet Dreams to find Rachel waiting outside, still wearing yesterday's clothes. Have you been here all night? I asked, unlocking the door. No, just since 5. She followed me in, dark circles under her eyes. I've been thinking about what you said, about proof. I started my morning routine, firing up the ovens and checking the prep list. And I want a job. The measuring cup I was holding clattered to the counter. Excuse me? I want to work here. For you. She straightened her designer blazer. I need to understand. Understand what? Everything. How you did this. How you knew it would work. How you're so confident now. I studied her face for any sign of manipulation. You've never worked a service job in your life. I know. She swallowed hard. I'll start at the bottom. Washing dishes, sweeping floors, whatever you need. Why should I trust you? Because I have nothing left to lose. Her voice cracked. The firm's gone. My savings are gone. My apartment. She trailed off. Let me guess. Dad was paying for it? She nodded miserably. Fine. I tossed her an apron. Start by wiping down all the tables. Then we'll talk. For the next few hours, I watched my perfectly manicured sister scrub tables. mop floors, and learn to operate the industrial dishwasher. She didn't complain once. Your hands are bleeding, I noticed during the lunch rush. She looked down at her cracked red knuckles. It's fine. I deserve worse. Here, I handed her some hand cream. First lesson of service work. Take care of yourself, or you can't take care of business. The bell above the door chimed, and Mom walked in. She froze at the sight of Rachel in an apron, serving coffee to customers. What are you doing? She asked, horrified. Working, Rachel replied. Table 6 needs more napkins, Elena. On it, I called back, watching Mom's reaction. But you're a lawyer. Was a lawyer, Rachel corrected. Now I'm learning how to make an honest living. Mom turned to me. Is this some kind of punishment? No, I said, arranging pastries in the display case. This is her choice. First real one she's ever made, probably. I came to tell you. Mom hesitated. We sold the house. We're moving into a small apartment next week. Good. Maybe you'll learn something too. Your father is looking for work. Really? What kind? Anything, she admitted. But no one's hiring. Our reputation is exactly what you earned, I finished. Karma's funny that way. The lunch rush picked up, and Mom watched as Rachel and I worked in sync, serving customers, making change, keeping the line moving. You're good at this, she said finally. I know. Could you? Would you consider hiring your father? I laughed. Not a chance. But there's a new cafe opening in one of my buildings next month. I'll put in a word with the owner. As what? Dishwasher, probably. Same place Rachel started. Mom's perfectly maintained facade crumbled completely. How did we get here? She whispered. By believing your own hype, Rachel answered before I could. By thinking we were better than everyone else. By treating Elena like she was nothing. She paused. Table 8 needs their check. On it, boss. She hurried off, leaving Mom and me alone. She's different, Mom observed. 3 days of honest work will do that to you. And you, are you? Am I what? Different. Really different. Not just desperate for help different. She looked around the bustling cafe, at her oldest daughter serving tables, at the empire I'd built from scratch. I'm trying to be, she whispered. Then try harder. I handed her a business card. That's the cafe owner's number. Tell him I sent you. Dad starts as a dishwasher or not at all. And us? She asked quietly. Will we ever be okay? That depends on you. All of you. I'm done proving myself. It's your turn. 6 months later, I stood in front of my newest acquisition, a 3-story Victorian building on Main Street. The morning sun glinted off the fresh paint and restored windows, highlighting the gold lettering. Sweet Dreams Enterprises. Not bad for a girl who just makes cupcakes, Marcus said, standing beside me. Speaking of which, Rachel emerged from my car, carrying a box of pastries. She'd traded her designer suits for jeans and practical shoes, and her hands were permanently stained with coffee and flour. The contractors want their usual breakfast order. How's Dad doing at that cafe job? Marcus asked her. Still washing dishes, still complaining, but he shows up every day. She shrugged. Mom's actually doing better. She got promoted to shift supervisor at the department store. And you? I turned to her. Ready for your own promotion? She nearly dropped the pastry box. What? I need someone to manage the new location we're opening across town. Someone who understands both the business and service sides. But I've only been here 6 months. 6 months of showing up early, staying late, learning every aspect of the business, and never once complaining about the work. I pulled out a contract. What do you say? Tears welled in her eyes. Why? After everything. Because you earned it, the hard way, the right way. Sometimes the sweetest victory isn't proving others wrong, it's helping them become right. Because in the end, true success isn't measured in bank accounts or business empires. It's measured in second chances, hard lessons learned, and the courage to start over, even if it means starting from scratch, just like the perfect recipe. Story 2. After 12 years of running my father's company, I finally made it worth $75 million. During a family meal, my father grinned at me and said, "Your brother will now take over." My heart sunk, but I smiled back. The next morning at work altered everything. After 12 years of running my father's company, I finally made it worth $75 million. At a family dinner, my dad looked at me and said, smiling, "Your brother will take over immediately." My heart sunk, but I smiled back. the next morning at work altered everything, as if he had already made up his mind before uttering the words that would alter everything. I can still picture my father's grin that evening and his proudly placed hand on my brother's shoulder. "Your brother will take over immediately." I felt my stomach drop, but years of practice kept my face composed. I smiled back, as if his words didn't rip directly through me, as if they weren't unraveling. In a flash, 12 years of my life's labor, the clinking of glasses, and the soft chatter of close business partners and extended relatives filled the dining area. This wasn't simply a family supper. It was a festivity, a minute to honor everything that I had accomplished and all that we had built. When I was a little boy, my father founded Harper and Company, a small logistics company that in its early years almost survived. I watched father labor late into the night, forgo family holidays, and always pursue another contract to make ends meet as a child. When I was 24, fresh out of business school, he finally let me step in, though I had to fight for that opportunity, and I had done more than just step in. By growing operations, landing multi-million-dollar contracts, and incorporating state-of-the-art technology, I had turned Harper and Company from a faltering regional logistics company into a national powerhouse. Once a tiny, almost bankrupt business, it was now a $75 million market leader. And yet, in this moment, none of it mattered. My brother Ethan was already going to take over, according to my father's decision, not me. Murmurs of congratulations were directed at Ethan as a slow wave of approval swept across the table. I watched as he dropped his gaze, faking humility, but I knew better. Ethan had never been truly invested in the business. He had spent the previous decade jumping from one unsuccessful business to another, never quite finding his feet. He wasn't interested in logistics. He was more interested in power than he was in operations. I had established Harper and the business from the bottom up, made all the difficult decisions, participated in all the late-night strategy calls, and negotiated every contract over the course of 12 years. None of it had been done by Ethan, and yet here we were. Nevertheless, I suppressed my feelings. I had long since discovered that expressing grief was a sign of weakness in this household. I steadied my hand and went for my wine glass, then raised it. "Smile, Lisa. Grin." To Ethan, I said, my voice smooth, controlled. The guests lifted their glasses, oblivious to the tempest developing behind my eyes. My mother gave me a glance from across the table, an enigmatic face, but I knew she understood. She had always noticed my effort, unlike my father. She refused to get involved, though. She didn't. And then my father, smiling with that same unflinching assurance, utterly oblivious to the fact that his decision had triggered a chain of events. From the other side of the table, Ethan looked at me with a smirk that was just barely concealed by the corner of his mouth. I realized then that my father wasn't the only one who had made this choice. This was what Ethan had been anticipating, playing the part of the obedient son who had at last discovered his purpose. He had positioned himself carefully. My father, who has always been a traditionalist, didn't see anything wrong with his reasoning. The dominion should pass to a son, a good daughter. The efforts of a daughter were always regarded as short-term, a footnote in history, despite her best efforts to show differently. However, none of them had taken into consideration the fact that I had invested 12 years in not just creating a business, but also strengthening my position within it. And tomorrow morning, they would discover exactly what it meant. I didn't get much sleep that night. Every sacrifice I had made for Harper and Company was reenacted in my memory. The relationships that fell apart due to my ambition, the late nights, and the birthdays that were missed. For this company, I had sacrificed everything, and now they expect me to just leave. By 3 a.m, when I was at my home office, typing rapidly, they had underestimated me. Each and every executive agreement, share, and contract. I was the one who understood this company's inner workings the best. Ethan believed that he would have a smooth transition and that his name would be on the office door by the following week. His job was safe. He was unaware that I was gaining considerably more valuable control, while my brother and father were busy pretending to understand the company and making public appearances, respectively. As I had done for the previous 12 years, I entered Harper and Company's offices at precisely 8:45 a.m. The polished floors, the same walls, and the same level of efficiency as workers became used to their daily schedules. Today, however, was different. I didn't step into my workplace today. I was entering a combat zone. It was quite peaceful in the reception area. The silence that comes before a storm. They were aware that the murmurs had already begun. My father had made an announcement during dinner, and word of it had gone viral. Workers avoided making immediate eye contact and instead gave me uncomfortable glances. They are unsure about their allegiances. I didn't give them credit. I maintained my stance and walked with assurance, my heels tapping on the marble flooring. Don't show them that you're shaken. My office closed the door behind me as I walked in. My father and Ethan were supposed to take up their new roles as CEO and heir presumptive, and I had just 15 minutes until they arrived. It was 15 minutes until their entire scheme fell apart in their faces. I took a deep breath as I sat at my desk and turned on my computer, which displayed a list of private documents and contracts. They had believed it didn't matter and had never considered looking at one another. I retrieved my ownership documents. After a moment of my hands hovering over the keyboard, I clicked on the executive shareholders agreement file. I waited after that. My door was sharply knocked at exactly 9 in the morning. I didn't even try to answer. With a confident demeanor, my father and Ethan entered through the open door. He was born. Ethan's is meticulously crafted. Ethan, wearing a pricey blue suit, grinned triumphantly at me as my father walked in like a king, inspecting his empire. I had to fight the urge to chuckle. As though acknowledging me was a favor, my father responded, "Lisa," in his customary commanding tone, "you must be conscious of the change that is taking place now." Change? I know it's an interesting word choice, I remarked, reclining in my chair with ease. I looked at Ethan, who continued to grin. Excellent. My father went on, nodding as though we all agreed. As the next CEO, Ethan will take over. You will need to assist us with the handover. Make sure he understands the procedures before you formally proceed. I raised an eyebrow. Go on, I said, seeming to be perplexed. Dad, I think you're incorrect about something. Anger made his face twitch. He was accustomed to my silence, to my capacity to follow orders. This was not what he had expected. Lisa, he began in a tight voice, as though addressing a young kid. There is no dispute about this. The choice has already been made. I grinned first, then slowly and knowingly. Oh, I responded quietly. I know, Dad. The problem is that you lack the power to decide that. Ethan shook his head and gave a quiet snort. Don't make this hard, Lisa. We're attempting to take the simple route. I didn't answer. I grabbed the remote control instead and pushed a button. The document I had been looking at earlier appeared on the big screen on my office wall. An agreement amongst executive stockholders was struck on August 17, 2015. Lisa Harper, James Harper, and Father Ethan Harper signed. My dad's face went a little white. I looked across at Ethan. Are you even familiar with this document? He shifted uncomfortably, crossing his arms. A deal with stockholders. He made a guess. I gave a nod. Indeed. You know what it says too? I highlight a key sentence with a touch of the screen. During Harper and Company's reorganization, this paper was written. It makes it very evident that the consent of all majority shareholders is necessary for any transfer of executive authority, including the appointment of a new CEO. I looked into my father's eyes. Dad owned 60% of the business. The ensuing hush was oppressive. The look on my father's face hardened. Ethan murmured, "That's not possible," and moved forward to look at the paper. "It's actually very possible," I responded with ease. You see, throughout the years, Dad was busy acting as the patriarch of the company, while you were busy failing at every startup you touched. I was engaged in another activity. I bent over. I was reserving my spot. I looked back to my dad. Do you recall a time when you need funding to expand? In 220? In return for my investment, you agreed to give me an extra 15% of your shares. Additionally, 10% more was deposited as collateral in my name in 220 during that court dispute, which you never sought to recover. I am the dominant shareholder after that, and my initial 35%. My dad's mouth tightened. However, Ethan was in a panic. He spat. You must be bluffing. I took out another document. The most current court document submitted to the state is this one. Do you want to make sure? Ethan grabbed the paper and scanned it, the color fading from his face every second. This is not possible, he stumbled. Tell her that she can't do this, Dad. since he knew I had legally outwitted him and there was nothing he could do about it. My father said nothing. I stood up and let out a deep breath. I told Ethan, I'm not firing you. I wouldn't want to force you into the actual job market, but you will report to me and you will work under my direction. Otherwise, I pointed to the door. You can get out now. For the first time in his life, Ethan turned to face my father with beseeching eyes, but he was at a loss for words. This cannot be fixed, since this was no longer his firm. I owned it. It was oppressively quiet in my workplace. The legal paper was still in Ethan's grasp, his fingers white from holding on so tightly. My father stood motionless beside him, his countenance inscrutable. However, I was aware he was attempting to figure out how to get out of this by being calculating. One did not exist. I had been prepared for this moment for years. Experience had taught me never to presume loyalty where power was involved, not because I had anticipated treachery. My father stared at me, as though he didn't recognize me for the first time in my life. He might not have. That's all then. When Ethan did speak, it was in a harsh tone. All of it is being taken by you. I laughed softly and without humor. Taking everything. I said it again, taking a step toward him. I started this business from scratch, Ethan. Every agreement, every growth, every invention. While you were busy failing upward, I made it happen. I was sustaining this business. Thus, I'm not taking anything. I promise. I leaned a little. All I'm keeping is what I already have. Ethan had no argument, but his expression contorted in rage. He was aware of my correctness, and worse, my father was as well. He had spent years thinking that his kid would receive what was properly mine, that family was more important than skill. He had misjudged me. He was now having to pay for that error. The hush was finally broken by my father. Lisa, you're doing something wrong. I could hear the tension underneath his cool, collected speech. A family should remain united. Are you certain you want to destroy this bridge? I looked him in the eye. Dad. Slowly, I said. You burned this bridge the instant you made your decision without me. He made a small line with his lips. Business is larger than simply one individual. We can come up with a solution that benefits everyone. I cocked my head, pretending to pay attention. Yes, I do agree. I'm giving you both a choice because of this. I looked first at Ethan. You are free to remain with the firm. I spoke in a silky voice. Expert. You won't be the CEO, though. You will assume a limited authority advising position. You will receive a substantial compensation, but I'll be your boss. Ethan tensed. However, I continued or didn't stop. You are free to leave. I'll pay market value for your shares. You might use the funds to start a new project that you are passionate about. My dad sneered. It seems like you have all the cards. I grinned. Yes, I do. My statements were followed by a heavy hush. I gave them permission to dwell in it and experience helplessness. My father finally let out a breath and shook his head, seemingly incredulous. He mumbled, I never thought you'd do this. Not to your own relatives. His comments gave me a tremendous pain. Not to your own relatives. I wanted to let him know that this was his fault. The fact that he had decided to ignore me, to pretend that I wasn't permanent, but I wasn't, because it didn't matter in the end. The important thing was that I refused to let them steal what I had created. Never, ever. Ethan was the first to storm out. Goodbye. I knew enough about my brother to know what he would do next. He would visit our acquaintances, family, and relations, pretending to be the victim of corporate treachery. I didn't give a damn. My goal was not to gain their favor. My goal was to secure my future here. My father waited a little longer, as though he thought I would alter my mind, but I didn't. He nodded slowly. You've evolved. Silently, he said. I looked him in the eye. No, father. At last, I quit playing the part. Then he went away. I sat back down in my chair and let out a breath. I ought to have felt triumphant. I had won the battle for my position. But when I glanced at the vacant doorway, I felt something else too. A persistent, silent anguish. I had always had a desire for my father's acceptance. A tiny, desperate part of me had believed that he would eventually notice me if I put in enough effort and repeatedly proved myself. In actuality, though, he had never looked. And now, he was forced to see me for who I truly was at this point. Nor his daughter, nor his short-term position as Harper and Company's real boss. I shifted my attention back to my computer. I had built this business for 12 years. I would now make it untouchable for the next 12 hours. Even though my brother and father had attempted to take everything away from me, they ultimately lost everything. My workplace felt vacant for the first time in 12 years. There were no calls from my dad. Ethan didn't send any passive-aggressive emails. Nothing but quiet. However, peace was not implied by quiet. It signaled the start of the fight. I was aware that my father would not go in silence. Ethan, too. He would do whatever it took to get back what he believed to be his birthright. I wasn't gullible enough to believe that this was the end of it. It was only getting started. Employees of the firm who had welcomed me with assurance the previous week suddenly appeared reluctant, as if frightened to take sides, and by the next morning, I could already sense the underlying uneasiness. Some heads of departments avoided making eye contact. I was aware of what was taking place. Ethan and my dad were employed at the Whisper Network. Senior executives, board members, old relatives, and pals. They were casting doubt on me by portraying me as aloof, cruel, and disloyal. In particular, Ethan had adopted the persona of the injured son, cheated on him by his own sister. I could see him sitting at a fancy restaurant today, pretending to be sad as he explained to our investors how I had taken the business away from my father and him. He would have very little to say, just a trembling head and a deep sigh. The words were positioned with care. All I ever wanted for my kids was the greatest. It was deliberate and risky since they may force me out of my own firm, or at the very least prevent me from leading it if they were able to turn my senior executives and board members against me. I had no intention of allowing it to occur. I convened an executive emergency meeting that afternoon. I could sense the tension in the air as soon as I entered the boardroom. Half the room stayed out of my line of sight. The other half kept a watchful eye on me, anticipating my lapse. At the head of the table, I sat down. "My chair," I said. "Let's not waste time." Even I am aware that my voice has been used in hushed tones, behind closed doors, and during cocktails. I let my gaze to wander throughout the room, stopping briefly on each individual to cause them to squirm uneasily. I am also aware that some of you are unsure about the sustainability of my leadership. Some folks stiffened. Nobody said anything. I drummed my fingers on the high-gloss table. Now let's get that straight. A presentation appeared on the screen behind me. Figures, information, facts. From a small, failing regional firm, I turned it into a $75 million industry leader. Under my direction, we have grown into 6 additional areas and had a 300% growth in sales over the past 5 years. I asked Paul, the CFO, whether there was any financial evidence that this business was struggling under my direction. After a moment of hesitation, Paul shook his head. The number. Indeed, forecasts indicate a further 20% rise in the upcoming quarter. I gave a nod. Thus, let's be truthful about the situation at hand. I bent over. The fact that the business is having trouble doesn't bother my father or brother. They don't care that I'm not doing well as a leader. They're angry because they thought that, regardless of my qualifications or performance, I would resign and let Ethan take over. There was silence in the room. Then I really dropped the bomb. Additionally, I am aware that some of you have received calls in the past 24 hours offering incentives to pressure me to leave. I cocked my head a bit. Now is the time for everyone there who wants to reveal such talks. Some of them shuffled uneasily. One of the top executives then cleared his throat, following a protracted silence. He confessed that your father had called me. He stated that he was thinking about formally appealing to the board. Not surprised, I nodded. And did he provide you anything in exchange for your help? A slow nod, followed by a pause. It's there. I sighed and got to my feet. This company was built by my father, I added. I will not deny that. However, I went farther than he ever could, and I won't let him control it from a distance. I let my voice slip, a little restrained. Risky. He'll get a fight if he wants one. Gazing intently at each executive, I collected my documents. This is your chance to assert power if you think my father and brother should be in charge. Keep quiet. Nobody made a move. Excellent. I turned around and left. I held my head high. It was more than simply keeping me around. Making sure they never believed they could take it from me again was the goal of this. I made my own call that evening, not to an investor or a board member, but to the press. By morning, the headline power shift at Harper and Company appeared in every major news outlet's business section. In a skirmish in the boardroom, Lisa Harper outwitted the family. I had taken action. I was waiting for their turn now. My inbox blew up the morning after my story was published. Missed calls, emails, and texts from board members, investors, and journalists. A few were helpful. A few were wary. However, the majority of them shared a single query. Is it accurate? I waited for them. I was aware of my father's strategy. He had been honing his craft of public image for decades. He was aware of the importance of reputation in the corporate world. He would discredit me in public if he couldn't beat me in the boardroom. And he was attempting to accomplish just that. The initial counterattack came at midday. A well-written, well-organized press release that is full of false information. Harper & Company has always been a family-managed business. Although we are disturbed by recent events, we are still dedicated to maintaining the principles that founded our business. We anticipate a seamless transition as we go, but leadership changes are unavoidable. Though it was subtle, I understood its true meaning. Lisa is careless. Lisa is erratic. Lisa doesn't work well with others. It didn't surprise me. I was angry, though. I watched the news in my office while business analysts argued over my leadership. Was Lisa Harper's takeover too forceful? In the long run, the company suffered because of her lack of cooperation. Is she able to bounce back from this PR catastrophe? They spoke as though I wasn't paying attention, and as though I wasn't already preparing my next move. Because I was going to give my father and Ethan a public war, if they wanted one. I didn't make an announcement. A press conference was not called by me. Rather, I called an old acquaintance of mine who works in investigative journalism. I said, I have something for you, but you'll have to hurry. I forwarded emails, financial reports, internal records, and papers an hour later, providing proof that Harper & Company, led by my father, had participated in dubious business activities throughout the years. Within a day after I had spent the previous 10 years discreetly tidying up, the news broke. Behind Harper & Company's scenes, a history of financial cover-ups and concealed debts. It was a harsh article. My leadership was commended for improving the company's financial situation. It chastised my father for his previous poor management. Most significantly, it demonstrated that Harper & Company had only survived because of me. The storyline abruptly shifted after that. The board no longer questioned me. My father had nowhere to hide, and the investors ceased to hesitate. My father eventually gave me a call 2 days later. Before answering, I let the phone ring 3 times. Lisa, he murmured in a strained voice. We must speak. I reclined in my seat. Dewy, quiet. Then a sigh, at last. That wasn't necessary for you to accomplish. I gave a little chuckle. You didn't, either. This firm was intended to have a legacy, he remarked. For the household. For both of you. A familiar aching went through me. There had been a small, stupid part of me that had also desired that. However, it is no longer the case. Dad, you should have trusted me with the legacy if you wanted me to protect it, I remarked gently. You attempted to take it away from me instead. Another lengthy stillness. Then, almost grudgingly, he inquired, Now what? I let out a slow breath. Right now? Right now. I ensured that they would never again have any influence on my business. The conflict was finished. My dad had lost. Both Ethan and I had vanished. I was victorious. However, I felt nothing but loneliness as I sat in my office and gazed out over the metropolitan skyline. I had fought for Harper & Company for 12 years, strengthening it, defending it, and building it. However, even though I had gained my position, I had also lost something else. Thus, the price of that triumph was more than I had anticipated. My relatives. I entered the office the following day as though nothing had happened, but the truth was known by everyone. The murmurs had ceased. The uncertainty had subsided. I was more than simply the CEO, Lisa Harper. I was Lisa Harper, the lady who had defeated her brother and father by outwitting them. I was revered by some for it. I was dreaded by some, and a little bit more. There were still some who awaited my fall. I waited for them. My father and I had our last conversation in the conference room at midday. He seemed worn out, older, as though he had finally come to terms with the consequences of what had transpired. When he did speak, I waited for him to do so first. I had never heard him speak so softly. I'm retiring, he said plainly, with immediate effect. I didn't respond. This was what I had anticipated. I'll sell what's left of my shares, he added. As an investor, I will retain a modest portion, but I will no longer be involved. I closely examined him, and Ethan's jaw tensed. He is no longer there. My dad acknowledged that I accepted the buyout. He will not return. I had a sneaking suspicion it would end this way. Ethan had never had the strength to fight for himself. He had done what he always did once it became evident that he had lost. Run. Even so, listening to it aloud caused a pain inside of me, not regret, not guilt, the finality of everything. I gave a nod. I get it. My dad let out a breath and rubbed his temple like he was suffering from a headache. After a lengthy silence, he said something that caught me off guard. You were underestimated by me. It was the closest I would ever get to an apology, but it wasn't one. Oddly enough, I discovered that I no longer need it. Harper & Company has completely changed its appearance within a month. The former board members who had sided with my father and Ethan are no longer there. Although the business had always been successful under my direction, it was now genuinely mine after the executives who had questioned my leadership left, and a new vision accompanied that control. I moved into businesses my father had been too cautious to pursue, upgraded systems he had deemed superfluous, and proposed ideas he had consistently refused. Profits skyrocketed in just 6 months. We surpassed the $100 million milestone in less than a year. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just battling to prove myself. I was struggling to create something that would never be taken away from me. I had dinner with my father a year after everything had transpired. It was our first conversation since Dad retired. He had changed appearance, less noisy. He wasn't angry anymore, just agreeing. I read about the most recent offer. Over his drink, he remarked, "You closed." It was a clever move. I smirked faintly. I know. A shadow of a smile graced his lips. There was no tension between us now. There is no more battle to wage. Only the basic, irrefutable truth. I had shown him how misguided his attempt to push me away was. To Harper & Company, he murmured, raising his glass. I didn't feel resentful or angry as I clinked my glass against his, this time. Just peace, because I already knew that I had won and didn't need his permission to realize it. I reflect on the things I've learned from this trip, including the fact that family can be your worst enemy, as I sit in my office now and gaze out over the city where I established my empire. Loyalty is a commodity, not a promise. That authority is never granted, it's already taken. Most crucial, though, is that sometimes putting aside your need for approval and focusing on creating something is the best way to demonstrate your value. So powerful that they will never be able to ignore you again. I don't regret anything. I want to make sure that no one ever forgets that Harper & Company are now mine. Story 3. A video of my relatives calling me a useless burden after I'd been paying their mortgage for years was provided to me by my uncle. We are indebted to her. They said I kept quiet and acted normally until the next payment was due. My entire world appeared to spin when my uncle emailed me the video. There they were, my parents and my brother Thomas, sitting around our old kitchen table in Phoenix, talking about me, as if I was nothing more than a burden. The icy words seemed to be mocked by the warm glow of the familiar Arizona sun that streamed through the windows. The only reason Lindsay assists is because she owes us. After everything we have done for her, my mother replied, her voice brimming with disdain. The least she can do is pay the mortgage. My brother, Thomas, joined in with a smirk. Yes, and she gives the impression that she is doing us a great deal of good. What a farce. The worst part was when my father nodded silently in agreement. They were able to destroy me because the man who had previously helped me with my math homework and taught me how to ride a bike just sat there. Their words were clearly audible despite the blurry film, which was undoubtedly taken without their knowledge. Every time I saw it, I felt a strange mix of numbness and clarity. For the past 4 years, I had been making large mortgage payments to them through my LLC, Divine Investments. They thought they were paying a bank, so they never bothered to read the fine print of the deal. Even as they complained about my meager assistance, my financial advisor had assisted in organizing each month. They earned their meager sum, while I paid the majority of the bills. My Uncle Jason sent me a mail just after that. You had to see this, Lindsay. I was unable to remain silent any longer. For months, they have been chatting in this manner. Sitting in my home office, I stared at the spreadsheets that detailed all of the payments I had made. The numbers didn't lie. Over $200,000 was spent to keep them content in that house. My hands should have been shaking with anger, but they stayed solid when I pulled up the mortgage agreement. When I remembered the buy option clause that my financial advisor had insisted on, including in case she had brought it up, my lips curled into a small smile. Looking back, I wonder whether she had foreseen this sort of thing. The next payment was due in 2 weeks, and for the first time, I understood exactly what I needed to do. I picked up my phone and sent my uncle a brief message. I appreciate you telling me the truth. I won't tell them you sent this, so don't worry. But things are about to change. The family would never acknowledge it, but I've always been their safety net. 4 years ago, when Phoenix's real estate market crashed, they were in danger of losing their home. I assumed control. At the age of 27, I had already achieved success in my role as a manager of software development. Ironically, they never gave their approval to my career decision. They wanted me to take over my father's failing real estate business instead. Software shouldn't employ women. My mother would mumble, her lips pursed in distaste. The one with true business savvy is your brother Thomas. Yet Thomas, with all his commercial expertise, had nearly bankrupted the family company within 2 years of taking control. I spoke with Kate, my financial advisor, when they required assistance with the mortgage. She provided a fresh solution: create an LLC, employ it to acquire the property, and pretend that they are nonetheless communicating with a bank. In this way, you can help them and legally protect yourself at the same time. It seemed perfect at the moment. I could help without dealing with their pride. Everything proceeded as planned. Divine Investments, LLC, became their mortgage holder, and I boosted their monthly payments without their knowing. My family stayed respectable and steady because of me. The only person who knew the truth was my uncle Jason, having overheard Kate and me discussing it at a family occasion. "Lindsay, you're too kind to them," he'd said then. "They don't deserve your kindness." Naturally, I defended them. Their home. They may not understand my choices, but they have always given me a place to call home. Now that I had seen that film 4 times, I realized my error. I couldn't stop thinking about their words. "We are indebted to her." What a farce. The least she can do. Every sentence seemed like a deeper twist on a knife. My laptop opened, and I signed into the LLC's account. The next mortgage payment was due on the 15th, which was 2 weeks away. They had always transferred their share on time, and had never been late. But now that I knew how they really felt, I had no intention of hiding the rest this time. Let them suffer the repercussions of their lack of gratitude. Allow them to manage the bank on their own. They had no idea that their daughter, the worthless burden, was their landlord. The thought brought a smile to my face. There are times when karma needs a little prodding. It didn't end with the video. My uncle Jason provided me with further evidence the next day. Screenshots of conversations from family groups in which I had been excluded on purpose. It was made 6 months ago. The phrase family finances is appropriate. Each communication seemed like a worse betrayal than the one before it. Although I'm here every day managing Dad's business, Lindsay feels she's so special because of her tech job, Thomas wrote, and she seldom contributes to the mortgage. I was completely chilled by my mother's response. We ought to request additional funds from her. She is unmarried and childless. What else does she spend money on? She is unable to effectively support her family, despite the sacrifices we made to raise her. With trembling hands, I took out my financial documents and performed the calculations. Through Divine Investments, I had made $267,843 in mortgage contributions over the previous 4 years, but they had only made $52,157. They believed that the majority of the mortgage was covered by their $1,100 monthly bank payments. They were unaware that I was making the extra $5,400 a month. My mother left a message on my buzzing phone. "Would you be able to join us for supper on Sunday, sweetie? We have to talk about something vital." I knew exactly what that something was. They planned to use guilt tripping and emotional manipulation to ask for more money. My stomach churned at the prospect of sitting there, appearing as though I had no idea what they genuinely thought of me. I gave my financial advisor, Kate, a call. "I have to be aware of my options about the purchase agreement. I suspected you may," she said without appearing surprised. "Remember the clause we added? If they don't pay, Divine Investments has the right to immediately activate the purchase option. They would become month-to-month renters, and you would own a house entirely. My mind began to work out a strategy, and I decided that standard Arizona eviction procedures would be applicable if they were behind on their rent. Notifying them would be lawful for you. She paused. Are you convinced you want to pursue this road, Lindsay? Years of condescension and being the family ATM while they made fun of me behind my back came to mind. I pictured Thomas ruining our father's business as they praised his business sense. I examined every critical statement criticizing my career, my actions in life, and my purported duty to them. Yes, I said, my voice firm, I'm sure, but I won't tell them anything yet. For the time being, let them believe everything is normal. I answered my mom's text message. Of course, I'll be at the dinner. Looking forward to it. The heart emoji was necessary, despite its irony. They did a good job training me, after all. A perfect poker face is sometimes essential for the finest counterattack. For the first time since this arrangement started, I would not be present to catch them when they fell, and the next mortgage payment was due in 13 days. Sunday dinner appeared to be a self-control drill. I got to their residence in Phoenix at precisely 6 o'clock. As the sun sets, it paints the desert landscape in tones of orange and purple. The home, my house, appeared to be exactly the same as it had been for the past 20 years. In theory, the air was filled with the familiar fragrance of my mother's lasagna, a conscious choice to evoke recollections of happier times. Lindsay, sweetheart, with her pricey jewels gleaming in the sunlight, my mother rushed to embrace me. I noticed that it was brand new, probably purchased with money they should have used to pay off their mortgage that was due in 9 days. In his ironed work casual attire, Thomas sat at the dinner table looking more confident than usual. Hi, sister. Making time for your family is admirable. I grinned, recalling his comment about me hardly assisting. If only he realized that my kindness was the cornerstone of his whole existence. I answered, I always have time for family. My throat is heavy with irony. My father entered from his study, his reading spectacles perched on his nose. I assumed the documents he was reviewing were bank statements. I almost laughed when I saw the webpage. They carefully prepared their pitch before we ate. My mother began laying out the lasagna. We wanted to discuss something significant. She looked at my dad, who gave her a supportive nod. I took a bite out for myself and said, Of course. What's on your mind? Thomas cleared his throat. Dad's business has been having some issues, as you are aware. Over time, the real estate market has evolved. I slowly chewed the lasagna as I took a bite. The business has been struggling ever since Thomas took over. Even so, the Phoenix market is more robust than before. Across the table, my mother grabbed for my hand and said, We've been thinking about how fortunate we are to have such a successful daughter. Your father and I sacrificed a lot to provide you a good education. Her performance gave me new perspective, the delicate touch, the reminder of their sacrifices. It was also well organized. My father went on to remark that the mortgage payment has become a considerable problem. His discourse bears that particular tone of paternal control. He had always made me feel small, even though they had never bothered to grasp the difference. I made the automated fix because you were excelling at computer work and software production. Yes, exactly. He dismissed it with a wave. With the monthly payments, we thought you might be able to help us more. This is also your family's home, after all. If they only knew how much of it was already mine. All we're requesting is an additional $2,000 each month. My mom quickly added, It's not much for what you get paid. I took another bite of lasagna while trying to keep my composure. Unaware that I was already paying more than $5,000, they demanded an additional $2,000. The audacity was almost unbelievable. Finally, I said in a neutral tone, I'll think about it. Right now, the timings are a little erratic. Not sure? Thomas chuckled. Please, everyone is aware of your success. Unlike others of us who are truly working hard to keep this family's tradition alive, I grinned, thinking about the message their bank will send when they missed their payment next week. Yes, Thomas, you're right. We all get exactly what we deserve sometimes. I took a deliberate detour through my father's study after dinner in order to excuse myself to use the restroom. I could hear Thomas and my dad conversing in low tones through the open door. My heart pounding, I halted as their sentences trailed off. She won't help, Thomas stated in a resentful tone. Did you notice how she sat there acting like she was very smart with her tech money when our company was having problems? Patience, said my father. There is another thing we can do. When she used our Wi-Fi last month, I noticed some investment documents in her cloud storage. Do you remember them? She's been using a business called Divine Investments to conceal money from us. My blood turned to ice. When I was last there, they had snooped through my files. I'd stupidly utilized their Wi-Fi without a VPN, and my cloud storage had synchronized automatically. My father continued by saying, I looked it up. It is a well-known LLC that is doing very well. She has been hoarding money there rather than providing for her family. I had a snake. My mom's voice interrupted. We'll give her another chance to volunteer her help. If not, I'll remind her about the time she borrowed funds from your company account to pay for her tuition when she was in college. She thought we never knew. However, we have evidence. Then she will have to assist us. I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. When their check for my tuition bounced, I borrowed the money they were referring to with my father's approval. I'd even paid it back within a month, with interest. I had emails confirming everything. They made a desperate and pitiful attempt at blackmail. And if that doesn't work, Thomas added, we can always reach out to her company's HR department, ask some questions about her mental stability, maybe suggest she's been stealing company resources for personal projects that would get their attention the casual way they discussed, destroying my career sent ice through my veins. They weren't relatives. They wore family masks and were parasites. After stealthily returning to the restroom and flushing the toilet for show, I made my way back to the eating area. They filed back in seconds later, all wearing rehearsed grins. Lindsay, my love, my mother said sweetly. Have you given any thought to what we discussed about helping more with the mortgage? I gazed into her eyes steadily. I have, in fact. You're correct. Family members ought to assist. Family. In roughly 8 days, I will have a response for you. The timing wasn't random. They had 8 days to make their mortgage payment, and I knew precisely what would happen when they missed it. Divine Investments would ultimately disclose its genuine ownership. For 8 days. Thomas scowled. Why such a certain timeline? I rose up, grabbing my handbag. Just need to check some things with my financial advisor. You get it? Correct. Being careful with money is just good business sense. I grinned at Thomas as I mimicked their favorite phrase. My mother accompanied me to the door, bringing me into another deliberate embrace. We knew you'd understand, dear. Family always comes first. I did agree. Thinking about the eviction notice I'd previously prepared. Family always gets precisely what they deserve. As I drove home, I contacted my Uncle Jason. You were correct about them, I remarked when he answered. But don't worry. I've had enough of being the silent participant in their small drama. It's time for the final act. The week dragged by with terrible slowness. My family continued their pressure campaign by texting about their dire financial circumstances every day. Each message merely reinforced my drive. I sent everything to Kate, my financial advisor, who was helping me prepare for the approaching battle. The paperwork is ready, Kate confirmed during our meeting, 3 days before the payment was due. Divine Investments may immediately execute its acquisition option if they fail to make the payment. I've also prepared the eviction notices just in case. I nodded, examining the paperwork. Are you certain that everything is sound legally? This cannot be fought. They signed the agreement 4 years ago, Kate informed me. Your dad didn't really read it. He was too desperate for the bailout. Everything is quite lawful. That evening, my brother launched his own attack. Hi, sister, he wrote. I just had a conversation with my tech recruiter acquaintance. I've heard that some businesses are laying people off. It must be frightening for you. Good thing you have relatives to fall rely on. In respect to such aid, we discussed about how the effort at manipulation was so evident that it was almost hilarious. I presented the note to my Uncle Jason over coffee the next day. He shook his head and added, they never change. I witnessed them doing this to every member of the family, as did your aunt. We separated years ago for that reason. Did you know they looked through my files when I was there? Unsurprised, I asked. They did the same to your cousin when she stayed there last year. They are constantly looking for leverage. He paused. Are you ready for the fallout? This won't sit well with them. I thought about their threats to contact my companies, for their plans to blackmail me, their years of taking my help while mocking me behind my back. I'm prepared. They made up their minds. They will now have to deal with the fallout. 2 days before the money was due, my mother contacted Lindsay. We need your response regarding the mortgage assistance. Families must be united during these difficult times. Don't worry, Mom. I said steadily. Everything will be clear very soon. The family's bank sent me an email that evening. They sought to transfer money from their account to Divine Investments, but the payment had bounced. They had already taken on too much debt. Kate received the notification from me. "Here we are," she said. "Would you like me to begin tomorrow?" The lasagna supper came to mind. Their smug faces, their casual discussion of destroying my career. I reflected on the years of coercion, the never-ending demands, and the unending ingratitude. "No," I returned the type. "Let's wait off till the payment is formally failed. Allow them to believe that everything is okay for the next 2 days." I learned a lot from them. Timing is everything. I got on my laptop and started sending an email to the Human Resources Department of my employer containing the proof Uncle Jason had gathered and a list of the threats made by my family. Better to get ahead of their potential attacks. I was not taking any chances because the end was near. The best form of retaliation, I sometimes told myself, is to simply let people pay for their own mistakes. At 9 a.m., the payment deadline passed. Sharp. The automatic system of Divine Investments sent out its notice of default. My phone was ticking down the seconds till the inevitable call, and I watched it. It took exactly 12 minutes. "Lindsay," my mother's voice sounded hysterical. "Our mortgage payment isn't working properly. We didn't default, as the bank claims, but that isn't possible. We need your help urgently." "Actually," I answered calmly, "a bank is not what Divine Investments is. It's an LLC, my LLC. Specifically." There was an overwhelming quiet on the other end. "What?" "At last," she muttered. "Examine your email. Due to your default, Divine Investments will notify you that it is executing its acquisition option. The house is now legally mine. Your status has been changed to month-to-month renters. This is a joke," she mumbled. "No joke. I've been covering the majority of your mortgage for 4 years while you are mocked." Behind my back, I was referred to as a burden, plotted to blackmail me, threatened my career. "How did you?" Uncle Jason showed me the footage. He showed me everything. "Now, about your tenancy. Your first rent payment is due in 30 days. I propose you start looking for somewhere else to live." My father's voice suddenly broke in. I would be placed on speaker. "You're not thankful," I interrupted him carefully. "Is there a method to speak with your landlord like that? The eviction notice is ready. Don't force me to serve it earlier than I intended." I blocked their numbers and hung up. Within minutes, my inbox began flooding with messages from flying monkeys, distant cousins and family friends telling me I was being harsh, that family should forgive family. I didn't read any of them before deleting them all. Forgiveness does not apply to all debts. 3 months later, I stood in the vacant house. The sound of my footsteps reverberated through the empty rooms. Last week, my family finally moved out, compelled to move across town to an apartment. They made every effort. Threats, guilt trips, legal battles. But in the end, the documents were ironclad. They had no option but to accept reality. Thomas's attempt to get in touch with my company's human resources department had a disastrous outcome. Uncle Jason's proof and my proactive record-keeping caused his charges to be dropped right away. Rather, his behavior was brought to the attention of his real estate board, which sparked an ethical probe that essentially put a stop to his career. My mother's final effort at manipulation came through a tear-laden voicemail. "How could you harm your own family in this way?" The answer was simple. I had finally come to believe them after they had demonstrated to me what family meant to them. They had gathered around the table, calling me useless as I paid their bills, and I strolled through the kitchen where it all began. I didn't miss the irony. Later, Uncle Jason and his spouse would visit to assist me in getting the house ready for sale. The money raised would be used to start a foundation that would assist people who have been abused financially. This could lead to something positive. After all, my phone rang with a text from Kate. "Just heard from their lawyer. At last, they are signing the final documents. It's truly over." I grinned as I took one final glance around the deserted house. Family always comes first, they taught me, but they never mentioned which family I should choose, and it felt just perfect for the first time in years.